Hello, I'm John Perry, and this is Representative Gary Glenn Reports. And Representative Glenn, it's nice to see you.
John, to see you again, sir.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You have reached the end of your first year in the Michigan House of Representatives, and you've actually been honored by a publication here in Lansing as their Freshman Legislator of the Year. That's got to be a nice accolade for you.
John, I didn't even know they were giving that award. It's given by the oldest news service here in the state capitol, which was founded in 1961. The reporters who cover the Capitol for the Michigan Information and Research Service, one of them used to be an editor of a paper in Indiana. One of them used to write for the Boston Globe. So these are professional journalists. Again, didn't even know they were offering such an award, but named me Freshman Legislator of the Year. Now that was selected from among 44 Republican and Democratic freshman House members and 10 freshman senators. So out of a group of 55 in total, certainly was gratified to be recognized, primarily for my leadership, they said, on the energy issue.
An issue we have talked a lot about in the last year.
Vice Chair of the House Energy Committee, but as I said in the Midland paper, which it was front page in the Midland paper here a few weeks ago, if there's any honor or recognition associated with it, it really is just a reflection on the fact that I have been very serious about this job, being conscientious, studying hard, which to grasp the energy issue required
a lot of moving parts there.
A lot of moving parts. I literally know that I studied harder than I ever did in college the first 2 or 3 months. But anytime you're recognized for hard work, as one of the reporters said, I had a stack 2 feet high of information about energy that was stacked on my floor desk on the floor of the House at one point. But certainly it's gratifying. I hope it's an indication to the people of Bay and Midland counties I am taking the job seriously, doing the best job I can, working hard, studying hard, and happy to have the 98th District get this recognition. That by being the elected representative of the 98th District, Bay and Midland counties, that it's the district and the people of the district might take some pride in that. I think the Midland paper did. They gave it pretty prominent coverage.
Along those lines, over in your neck of the woods, one of your colleagues, Representative Tim Kelly, was the winner of the same award a couple of years ago.
That's right.
In that part of Michigan, clearly, the lawmakers, the local people are sending to office are having an impact. You know, you talked about energy. That is an issue where you have had a tremendous impact on what is, after all, a very difficult, very important issue.
Well, maybe it's just that legislators from mid-Michigan are fast learners because we're, being recognized as freshman legislators of the year. And last time I was a freshman, John, I had bangs. So it's been a while. But yeah, on the Energy Committee, I asked Speaker Cotter at the beginning of the year to be able to have a leadership position on the energy issue because it's so important, as residents of my legislative district know, it's the single biggest business expense, for example, of Dow Chemical, our largest employer, and Dow Corning, and Hemlock Semiconductor, one of the biggest consumers of electricity in the entire state of Michigan. Even though they're not geographically located in my district, a lot of people work in my district or live in my district that work for Hemlock. Midland Cogeneration Venture. So the energy issue is very important for the business climate of Midland and Bay counties. And I heard Andrew Liveris, the CEO of Dow Chemical, give a speech in which he said, for the future, if we want to continue to have manufacturing operations in mid-Michigan, we're going to have a more competitive energy policy that gives us more competitive electricity rates. Michigan has the highest electricity in the Midwest, the 11th highest in the nation. And I'm down here in Lansing advocating for free market principles that'll help bring the cost of electricity down, not just for commercial and industrial users, but for residential homeowners as well. There's an attempt with legislation with some very powerful people supporting it to move us back toward a more monopoly system. And they were telling us when we took office back in January, it'd be on the governor's desk by June, then it was mid-September, then it was certainly going to be before Christmas. Well, here we are now in late January, and in some part at least, to my raising objections and raising issues and making a countervailing case for competition and consumer choice, all of those plans to fast-track this remonopolization of Michigan's electricity market so far have not come to fruition. And there are media reports now that say it's kind of stalled in the House. There are a lot of people who say that I'm in a position to claim some credit for that. But I think we're in a position where we should first practice the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. Don't take electricity choice away from the schools that have it now, or the hospitals, or the homeowners, or the commercial and industrial manufacturers. Do no harm first. If we do nothing on electricity, that's better than doing something bad that would make our electricity costs even higher. So yeah, that's been a focus of my year. I'm proud of this, John, but let's talk about another story, because unfortunately it's one I would rather have avoided, but this isn't the biggest story that's been in the paper lately in Midland. I look honestly to Congressman Dave Camp as my role model, and I spent about an hour on the phone with Congressman Camp the other day, who was kind enough to call and offer me his counsel and relate his activity. I know you and your family have also had some experience with this, but at Mid-Michigan Medical Center this past weekend, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. That's, you wonder how you're going to react when you hear that kind of news. I used to shoot expert in the Army, 40 out of 40 on the targets when the still practice, when nobody was shooting back. And I'm thankful that I never had to face the test of what it would be if I could hit the broadside of a barn if somebody was shooting back. But in this case, the opportunity to test my faith and find out if it was just a lot of talk or if it was really there, I'm very gratified, and it gave us a sense of peace for my wife Annette and me both, that when we were told this in the ER room the other night after an MRI, that we reacted matter-of-factly, strategically, tell us what we've got to do to fight it, to defeat it, to win. At the point at which I then thereafter thought about having to tell my children, that was pretty tough. Got a little emotional then at the thought of telling my daughter and my other children that their dad has cancer. But that tough part is behind us. They reacted well, I guess as well as you might think possible. But that's a struggle and a challenge for us. It's a new challenge, but we're looking at it as a challenge. The thing I want to tell residents of Bay and Midland counties is that the doctors have told me that I can continue to do my job, fulfill my responsibilities to the voters who elected me, and that I can arrange and schedule my medical care on days that we're not here in Lansing. My wife and I moved to Midland now 18 years ago, and I have studiously avoided becoming a Wolverine or a Spartan fan. But I'm going to be treated at Mid-Michigan Medical Center in Midland, but also, as of tomorrow, for the first time, have an appointment at the University of Michigan Cancer Center in Ann Arbor. So by default, and out of gratitude for what I'm sure they're going to be doing, I'm going to have to become a Wolverine fan, since University of Michigan is going to play a role in my recovery and defeat of this new challenge. But I can not only do the job, the doctors have also said there's no medical reason that I could not be thinking about trying to keep the job if I were to so choose in 2016. We have to formally file as candidates in April, but there is no medical reason, no physical reason that I can't continue to do the job that I promised I would do, and I think I've been doing aggressively and well. But John, I know you shared with me, as has been the case with Republicans and Democrats, how many people have faced this challenge, my colleagues, staffers, lobbyists. But you shared with me that not only you, as a much younger man, you're still a young guy, but even younger,
I like to think.
And your wife. So
I am a survivor myself of Hodgkin's disease back in 1994, Representative. So we're talking 22 years ago now. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. I went through 6 months of chemo, followed by about 3 or 4 weeks of radiation. It has been in remission ever since. My wife, Carrie, meanwhile, was diagnosed in the fall of 2013 with cervical cancer. She had surgery and radiation at the time. In the summer of 2015, the doctors told her that she was dealing with a recurrence of her cancer. As we sit here right now in January, she's going through her 7th round of chemotherapy. I told a number of people at the Capitol. I've worked at the Capitol since 1993, actually, so a long time. I told a number of people, yourself included, back last summer that Carrie was dealing with recurrence of her cancer. And what you told me, Representative, when I was talking to you is something that has stuck with me. You said, John, you can fight cancer with chemo, you can fight it with radiation, you can fight it with surgery, and you can fight it with prayer. That is something that has very much stuck with me. One of your colleagues who was a physician said, we doctors do good work, but God does better work. Those are both phrases, both from the people I work for in the Michigan House of Representatives, are phrases that people gave to me and that I have very much carried with me every day. And I know that that sentiment obviously is very important, not just to you, but to your family as well.
It is, John, and I appreciate your bringing that up. When we were met with the news, I think we received it in faith, not in fear, because we realize our health, our lives, our very lives on a day-to-day basis, our next breath, are all in larger hands than ours. And I am a Christian. I believe my ultimate hope is in the healing power of Jesus Christ. I didn't give a second of hesitation to being willing to make this public. I followed Dave Camp's example. Dave thought it was something that, as a matter of public accountability, he ought to share with his constituents. So yeah, that was part of the motivation. But to tell you the truth, my major motivation was, if several hundred people who know us, know me and my family personally, pray for us, that's a good thing. If thousands of people we may never meet who share our faith, or people of other, of goodwill, of other faiths, find out about this news and feel led to join in praying for me and my family, that's a better thing. So I didn't hesitate one bit to make this public, let my constituents know, primarily to ask for their prayers. And if I could focus the ask for the prayers, it would be for my children. I feel like Annette and I are reacting in faith, but I'm concerned about that my children are not consumed with worrying about their dad. That was a tough thought to have to tell them. And I can just tell you they've reacted well, but I want to keep them in the prayers of all those who would think good thoughts in our direction. And that's honestly why I did it. I also wanted to be an example. And I've had so many people come to me after it was in the paper and had gotten around on email and Facebook and thanked me for being open about it and open about my faith in the healing power of Christ. It was an encouragement and uplifter to other people who were going through the same thing. But you're far much more down the line in your experience. I'm a cancer survivor 5 days so far.
But you are a survivor.
Since I found out about it. Apparently I've had it for a while, so I've survived it longer than 5 days. But you've known you had it at least 20 some years and are a survivor. So you're my hero. You're my role model. For knowing that if we face this with faith, we can overcome it and be an example to others.
And obviously, there is the answer there, Representative. Those prayers, that support. I opened up an email from you actually on a day off from work when you told me about your diagnosis. And I was sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, and I've made it a practice during her treatment for cancer to come home at the end of the day and tell her who, where I work, asked about her during the day. And she said, "Oh yeah, Representative Glenn. I've never met him, but you have mentioned him so many times." And immediately she said that you were in her thoughts and in her prayers. And obviously that extends to people, from what you've said, all over the Capitol, all over the state, and from so many denominations too.
That's true. I know that my niece had a priest perform a mass for me in Arlington, Virginia, a Catholic priest at my hospital room. I had a group of Baptist men and a group of Mormon men. Both came and laid hands on me and prayed for me. I've had people of all faiths and denominations assure me, and legislators, colleagues, lobbyists, assure me that I'm in their prayers. I've heard them say the same thing as I've related your situation. They've said the same thing about you and your wife, and we need to ask people to keep what is your wife's first name?
Carrie.
Carrie. So you'd have a name to pray for to keep your wife in our prayers, because she's going through it right now too. A perhaps more serious cancer and further along the line. So anyway, I just felt obligated to make sure people knew that. I'm not going to be hesitant to talk about it, because there is a question of public accountability. I don't think it's something on which you hide the ball. But also, I mean, for my sake, it's because I want prayer for my family and for me from as many people who would be motivated to do so once they know about the issue.
Representative, we will take a break right now.
Okay.
And we'll be back with Representative Gary Glenn Reports right after this. And we're back with Representative Gary Glenn Reports. Representative, we're sitting here a couple of days after Governor Snyder's State of the State address. Of course, an issue he spent a lot of time on, an issue that has received national attention, is the issue of Flint water. It's been taking up a lot of space in print since the start of 2016. Lawmakers here, actually only about 24 hours ago, acted in the House of Representatives with an appropriation of $28 million to deal with the situation. But the reality is it's probably going to be a situation that is ongoing.
It is going to be ongoing, but because of the sound fiscal management of the government of Michigan under Governor Rick Snyder, we have a projected $500 million surplus for this budget year. We're number one in the nation in manufacturing job growth over the last several years. Our personal income growth in 2014 doubled the personal income growth of 2013. Just happened to be the first year we were America's 24th right-to-work state that our income doubled, the right to work for more. But because of our financial success and being an economic turnaround story, we have a $500 million surplus. So I voted, as did I think it was unanimously, the House of Representatives voted for a $28 million supplemental budget expenditure at the request of one of the Democratic representatives of Flint for the emergency needs to back up the National Guard, the Michigan Army National Guard. I'm proud of them, used to be one. They're down there handing out water and filters. So in support of their mission, there's this additional money being expended. I also want to say that I'm proud of the governor for being the adult in the room, for being the mature person who, to the extent the state government is responsible, has stepped up to the plate and taken responsibility. The reason I say that is because, frankly, I think it's unfair that perhaps some of the critics, the other party's attack machine, has focused all of the responsibility on one person. He stepped up and he said, I'm sorry, I am responsible. The buck stops with me for anything that a state agency failed to do. He fired the director of the State Department of Environmental Quality. But just to put some things, and let me say one more thing before I start an accounting on the other side, is that I think that it is to some extent a waste of time and resources to spend all of our time trying to point backwards and accept to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I don't think the focus ought to be on trying to find who we can blame the most. It ought to be on putting our collective minds together, Republican and Democrat, and doing the proper positive steps to help the people of Flint. I did note that the president of Kettering University wrote a memo to the parents of Kettering assuring them that it might not be everything they're seeing it made out to be in the press in terms of being any kind of environmental threat to their children going to school in Flint, that it has been more limited. But the president would know better about that, the conditions at Kettering, than I do, so I'm just reporting that secondhand. But let's do, in terms of accountability and how Governor Snyder is so far the only person at any level of government who has said, yes, I'm somewhat responsible because I'm chief executive officer. I fired the DEQ director, a state agency which didn't act adequately. But it was the Democrat drain commissioner who first proposed taking the citizens of Flint off a safe water supply with the Detroit water system and in having a new water system under Flint's governance. It was the Democrat City Council of Flint that voted 7-1 to approve this project. And the one who voted no was not voting no because he was opposed to it. He thought it didn't go far enough. And then we find out in the Detroit News, which is, as we're taping this, it was today. So by the time people see this, it would have been last Thursday. We're taping on Thursday. The Detroit News reported that the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal Environmental Protection Agency, knew about this 5 months earlier than Governor Snyder did. Why didn't they act? All they would have had to do is put out a news release calling the public's attention to it 5 months earlier than the email trail, which Governor Snyder has now disclosed all of his emails. So we know that he was first brought to his attention in September. EPA says in the Detroit News today that they knew about it in April. They accepted fault for not having reacted more quickly. Well, in the rhetoric of the Democratic critics, does that mean that does that mean that President Obama is responsible for poisoning our children? Should the federal EPA director be fired? Should the federal government be responsible for paying for Flint residents' water bills? That's the rhetoric coming out of the Democratic Party about Governor Snyder. He's the only person in a position of responsibility who has stepped up in the public and said, I take responsibility. He's the grown-up in the room. He's the manager, not an ideologue, not a partisan, but a manager. I know he's mortified by the situation. But at the four levels of this that are involved, the president, as where the buck stops for the federal EPA, the governor, and the Flint City Council, and the drain commissioner in Genesee County, four of those levels are democratically controlled. The only person who has stepped up and taken responsibility and manned up is Republican Governor Rick Snyder. So I don't bring these up to take us away from focusing our efforts and our energies on doing the positive things to get clean water to the people of Flint. I simply bring it up to say how outrageous I think it is, the political attack machine being directed at Governor Snyder when he's the only one who's accepted any responsibility. And we now know the EPA knew about it 5 months earlier than the email trail indicates Governor Snyder knew about it. Why didn't the federal EPA, why didn't President Obama bring this to the public's attention and cause? All the EPA would have had to do back in April of 2015 is put out a news release. They complained in the Detroit News story that they were getting resistance from the local and state administrators. All they had to do was put out a news release. It would have been front page in every paper in Michigan the next day, and action would have been forced. And they knew about it 5 months earlier than Governor Snyder. So I will go back to making the point that casting blame is not where we ought to be spending our time. We ought to be doing it constructively. I voted in favor of the $28 million supplemental to get clean water and filters and a working, trustable water system back to the people of Flint. But frankly, I'm feeling a little fired up here in a position to praise the only person at any level of government who has been the adult and accepted their share of the responsibility. The DEQ did not do its job adequately. The governor has expressed that they reached kind of a point of bureaucratic mindset and didn't do the common sense thing. Well, that's a frustration we can all understand. But where's President Obama saying he's responsible for the federal EPA? Should he fire the federal EPA director? The governor has taken the steps, the very steps of accepting responsibility, and he's the one that's sitting back being a punching bag. Not when every other level of government that also shares responsibility is controlled by the Democrats. Excuse me.
Representative, the year we have been recording these programs, we have talked a lot about how you meet with individuals in their district, listen to their concerns. Sometimes those concerns find their way into legislation, and we have a case in point here with one of your fire chiefs.
Fire Chief Chris Coughlin of the Midland Fire Department. I've been proud to get to know Chief Coughlin, but this week, actually, as people are seeing this, Representative Ray Franz, chairman of the House and Regulatory Committee, is going to be bringing up my bill at the request of Fire Chief Chris Coughlin of the Midland Fire Department, simply on a committee that's made up of 15, 16, maybe as many as a couple of dozen people, advisory committees for building codes. Fire Chief Coughlin has thought that there is a need to have a stronger representation of the professional fire management community represented in the building codes. It's not going to give them any kind of control of the outcome, because they're just going to be, in the case of my bill, instead of one representative, two. And the other key change to be made is that the two appointees will be required to actually be experts in terms of building codes, not just associated in some way with the fire department, but people who had expert knowledge on building codes and how to suppress fires. So this is not a sexy issue. It's a basic, very foundational element of our government. A lot of the bills that get passed up here, probably 90% of them, you never read about in the paper. There's no controversy. It's these little housekeeping measures that nonetheless make a lot of sense. And I have found on many occasions, this is one of them, I don't have to be an expert on fire suppression. I have to have expert advice and counsel available to me, and Chris Coughlin has been that. And I know he and some other representatives of the Midland Fire Department plan to be here in Lansing this week to testify in favor of that bill in the committee. I'm proud to have sponsored it. I've already had one bill become law regarding civil asset forfeiture, which was something that law enforcement worked on over the past year. and was privileged to have the governor sign that law or that bill into law. But I don't know what the prospects for this will be, but it seems to me to be a common sense piece of legislation. And I appreciate Chief Coughlin for bringing it to my attention.
Representative, you mentioned some of those bills that get headlines in the paper. One of those bills was something called Senate Bill 571, approved by the House of Representatives just before Christmas and signed into law by the governor. Folks have probably heard about it. We're talking about now a law dealing with what officials, superintendents, who have you, can say prior to an election. There have been a number of labels hung on this legislation, so it might be a good time to maybe give a little bit of an explanation as to what SB 571 does.
A lot of mischaracterizations. I'm not going to call anybody's motivations into question, but certainly a lot of mischaracterizations of the effect of the bill. Number one, it is the constitutionally guaranteed First Amendment free speech rights of an elected official, a school superintendent, to have as much freedom to express their support or opposition to a ballot measure, a local millage, anything else that may be on the ballot, as any other individual, even if the legislature tried to muzzle or put a gag order on any local elected official. That would be a violation of their constitutional First Amendment free speech rights. So even if that was the intent, which it wasn't, it's not possible. Elected officials and school superintendents remain as free as they ever were to express their belief that people should vote yes or no on any given ballot question for local funding. All this bill says, and we're going to support legislation to make it clear even further, but all it says is they cannot use the taxpayers' money to campaign overtly for a yes or no vote, or to put out messages like, for example, one local government did something to the effect, if you don't vote for this new safety millage, you could die. These dire consequences, or our schools will close if this doesn't pass, and technically not say vote yes, but certainly lead you to a foreordained conclusion. We're going to clean that up a little bit, but the intent of the law was simply to say you can't use taxpayers' money to campaign. Now, my office uses taxpayers' taxpayers' money, but all I can talk about are issues. If something's on the ballot, your local school district, your local fire department is as free as I am to form a citizens campaign committee and raise voluntary contributions, go out and raise money from people who support a yes or a no vote, and as aggressively communicate that message as they wish under the Constitution of the United States, just like anybody else can. But they got to go out and form a campaign committee and use contributions, not tax dollars, just like I do as a candidate for the State House of Representatives. So even though that was clear in the original bill because of the objections, we're going to go back and clean it up a little and make it even clearer that that is the case, and then let the people decide. But I don't think you ought to have taxpayers finding themselves, if they're opposed to a ballot measure or a millage or something like that, having to take time away from their job, spend money out of their own pockets to advocate for a no position, and find themselves being campaigned against by somebody who's being paid for by their own tax dollars, so that they're having to pay twice. They got to pay for the other guy's campaign too. That's not fair. People shouldn't be compelled to have to financially contribute to campaigns for something that they politically disagree with.
Representative Gary Glenn, thank you very much.
You bet. Great to have you.
We'll
Again,
talk to you
John,
next month.
Take care.
And I'm John Perry. Thank you for joining us.